The Italian Golden Visa is probably the most affordable route to fast European residency right now. So, why has nobody really been talking about it? Well, the problem is that the lowest threshold of €250,000 requires you to invest in an innovative startup. And for most retirees who've spent decades building up their wealth carefully, that's an immediate deal breaker. The startup world feels opaque, risky, and frankly not something you'd want anywhere near your retirement savings. But that's exactly what today's guest has cracked. Michael Maxwell has placed over €100 million in various European residency investments, and he's built an innovative structure around that route that strips out the startup risk, turning what looked like a deal breaker into what could be one of the most interesting residency investments in Europe right now. At 10 years to citizenship, Italy is not a play for a passport if you want it fast, but what we're talking about today is permanent residency as a proper plan B. That means the right to live in Europe, real tax benefits, access to public healthcare without having to be ultra high net worth or needing to relocate permanently. If anything we covered today resonates with you, there's a link in the description to book a free, no obligation introductory call with Michael. All right, let's get started. Michael, thanks so much for coming on the channel today. It's good to have you here with us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Samantha. Lovely to be here as well.
So you've spent a lot of your career so far focused on the Portugal Golden Visa. You led the first fund there and you raised over €100 million. But what's behind this pivot to Italy and why now?
Yeah, I think, Portugal obviously still has a lot of merit, a lot of value. I call Portugal home and it's a great place to be. But a lot of the good things we saw happening in Portugal, say 10 years ago, such as good local policy for venture capital, digital nomads, attractive tax policy, but most importantly, attractive immigration policies, you're seeing Italy really implement now. And I don't think we can deny that Italy is just a wonderful brand that resonates with everyone, abundance of art, history, culture, lifestyle that's just, you can't compare, that it seemed a natural alternative to Portugal. Okay, it's not for everyone, which we can get into, but it just made a lot of sense. And with the volatility globally at the moment and optionality being such a buzzword that, people are actively looking for, you know what, Portugal's great, but it's excellent to have an alternative, especially one at the quality of Italy.
I feel that so far, Portugal in particular, plus Greece and Spain before they cancelled it, have kind of overshadowed Italy until this point. Do you think there's a specific reason for that? And is that starting to shift?
It's definitely shifting, specifically in the last 6 months. Comfortably, the inquiry flow and client conversions we're experiencing in Italy has increased tenfold in the last 6 months. I think what you didn't have in the past were really well designed golden visa or investor visa product in Italy. In Portugal, you had that in abundance. Spain, to a degree, Greece, of course, you've got that. But Italy was something that was a little bit too under the radar, which meant a lot of the gatekeepers or advisors to people looking for optionality and alternatives weren't aware of it or hadn't found a product they could comfortably get behind. A product that offered diversification, solid fundamentals like you'd expect in any sort of investment, such as, track record and team, but then things like liquidity as well.
I see. So if somebody's watching this and they're thinking about European residency as a good plan B, just in a nutshell for now, for starters, why should Italy be on their radar?
Italy's Italy, number one. It's just such a wonderful place. You can qualify for the Italian investor visa, €250,000, which is fantastic value for all it gives you, especially in a country like Italy. Freedom of movement within the Schengen space, unlimited time staying requirements, unlimited staying ability in Italy, access to public facilities such as healthcare and education. Italy, for sure, is to me a step up from a lot of other jurisdictions people look at, and it's just a really good value proposition. And for the time being, it's still very quick. We're managing to get people processed in, say, a 3 to 6 month time frame, from day of green lighting the investment to holding the physical visa. And a unique feature, especially those of us that have been dealing with Portugal a long time, I think we all have post-traumatic stress from the waiting times in Portugal. In Italy, you only invest after you're approved. So it's not like Portugal where you invest today and then you can wait 2-3 years to get approved. And while you're waiting, laws can change. In Italy, you get approved within, say, 30 to 90 days. the authorities say, we're happy with you, we're happy with the investment you've chosen, and then you only invest.
That is an excellent feature, and that really takes away so much risk for the investor, right? Especially, yeah, compared to routes like Portugal. And those timeframes also sound so speedy compared to what we used to. So, just those 2 points alone, I think it's already sounding very appealing. Next up, I think, Michael, if you could just walk us through briefly the main investment routes. Obviously, we're going to focus on, I think, one over the others, but what are the options available and what do those investment thresholds look like?
So there are higher thresholds in the form of a donation or government bonds of 2 million euros. What are the most popular routes are to 500,000 euros into a trading profitable Italian company, as well as 250,000 euros into a qualifying innovative startup. Okay, it can't just be any startup. It's got to be something with innovation, designing and developing something new with the possibility of being sold in the future.
Okay, so this 250,000 is the lowest threshold, and it's also very competitive, right, versus other investor options in the EU. But of course, people's natural reaction is going to be probably, oh, innovative startup. That sounds risky. That's making me a bit nervous as an investor. What is the general perception of this route? And do you think that's why it's been underutilized so far?
Absolutely. At Ariete Capital, we've managed to design something different that gets around that typical in startup risk that people associate. And absolutely, you say the words innovation, tech, startup in the same sentence, you'll assume high risk, high reward. And ordinarily, people would be correct in that, no doubt about it. But by structuring things carefully and correctly, launching the business meeting three of the three criteria that are required, most importantly, having pre approved and registered IP, you're actually able to allocate a lot of the capital you raise to more predictable, solid, steady, stable investments that mitigate, say, the 15 to 25% of capital you'll allocate to R&D and innovation.
Okay, we're going to jump into that in a bit more detail in the next section. But before we do that, could you just run us through the key benefits if somebody is going to put that sum into the Italian Golden Visa? What does the investor actually get in return for their money in terms of residency rights? And if they did want to go for citizenship, let's briefly touch on what that involves.
So 250,000 euros should hopefully get you a solid investment. Okay, I don't think people should look at this as a throwaway. Absolutely not. But there are options that are very solid. I mean, we're particularly proud of what we've put together, and the market's responded brilliantly to it. But with that, besides the investment, all the upside would be the right to spend unlimited time in Italy. For those that have passports that do not qualify for Schengen access, so people possibly coming from South Africa or Turkey, Brazil, they would then have permanent Schengen visas, so they can do 90 days in every 180 days in other European countries. They'd get full access to public facilities in Italy. A really interesting one, particularly for Americans hitting a retirement age, is access to public healthcare. And if you research the Italian public healthcare system, it's very highly rated, especially from a value for money proposition. You know, what you get versus what you pay is fantastic value. And outside of that, you just get to enjoy all those wonderful things that Italy offers in bucket loads.
I'm just thinking about the food more than anything, but
Yeah,
that's a big one.
exactly.
But the healthcare point is actually that's a very big factor, right? Especially if you're coming from the US and you're older, that's a big pull factor. So in terms of like naturalization, I know that requires 10 years of full time residency and B1 Italian. So for the typical person taking this route, it's probably not going to be their number one goal.
Yeah.
So permanent residency is going to be the destination, right?
Yeah, so what we often see are those that are looking at a legacy investment for future generations tend to choose a different jurisdiction. Italy is 10 years to a passport, and you do need to commit time to Italy to achieve that. That said, if all you want to do is keep the investor visa or golden visa and all the optionality and benefits it provides, you don't have to commit any time to Italy. You just have to be there for your visa renewals every 3 years. So in that way, it's really flexible. And who we see choosing Italy the most tend to be people retired, semi-retired, say 58, 60 plus, where I think they're cognizant that getting a European passport in 10 years' time isn't going to be life changing at that point in their life. What they're looking for is something that takes them to a place they really want to be, that has a lot of value, something that's quick, and you can get in at a lower entry point. And as we've said earlier, 250,000 euros to get the best of Italy is really, really good value. You can get permanent residency in Italy after 5 years. It would require renting a property in Italy during that period or having available accommodation. There's no minimum value to that property. Visiting Italy at least twice a year, okay, and that you cannot be outside of Italy for one prolonged 6-month period. And ideally, come year 4 or 5, file a tax return in Italy as well.
Okay, and is that something they would do on top of this investment or instead of after 5 years?
Once they then have permanent residency, they would no longer need their investor visa. So at that stage, they could look at liquidating, should they wish, their investor visa, or just keeping the investment purely as an investment. But then they'd be on a permanent residency status, so they wouldn't need the temporary investor visa.
Okay, that's interesting. So really, they're looking at, if they want, a 5-year time frame for holding this investment. After which point they can get the PR, and then they can potentially cash out if they wish to. Right?
Potentially, that's absolutely correct.
That's a lot of flexibility. So yeah, and again, contrast with the Portugal option where people are locked in for more than 5 years, often not just because of the funds, but because of the timeline itself being so unpredictable.
Yeah, correct. Italy's been, from a predictability point of view, an absolute breath of fresh air so far. It's been a really positive experience working with authorities. They're very communicative.
Mm-hmm.
You get a reply to the questions you ask in a more than satisfactory amount of time. And in fact, when you submit requests for your pre-approval, they're obliged to give you a reply within 30 days, and they're sticking to that. So it's really good.
Amazing. It's going some way towards curing the PTSD from Portugal.
For sure.
Cool. So let's talk about the vehicle. Now we talked about the benefits. Let's talk about Ariete. Am I saying that correctly?
Absolutely. Ariete Capital is a greater group, and within Ariete Capital at the moment, we've got two options. Ariete Invest, which is sort of more premium option into blue chip listed equities. But that qualifies at 500,000 euros. But the one we'll focus on today, mainly Ariete Tech, which is the innovative startup.
Perfect. So so tell us how the structure works and what's the investor actually putting their money into when they come in at this very affordable threshold.
Okay, so it is an innovative startup. So it is a company. The investor becomes a shareholder of an approved innovative startup in Italy. There's an official list of government approved startups for this purpose. The option in our case will be limited to 50 investors. We initially launched with a target of 40, of which, say, 32, 33 slots already taken. Due to demand, we've managed to find another 10 slots for those that are interested. And bearing in mind, this is a product that was launched in October, so it's been pretty fast moving. But it is, in America, you call it an LLC, limited liability company, and investors come in as a shareholder, as are we. We're shareholders in the same company, along with the other investors who are all investor visa applicants.
Okay, I think that's already reassuring, right? Beyond what the perceptions might be. I think the fact that 80% of the capital, is that right, goes into financial assets versus the tech product itself. So could you explain a bit more about how that allocation breaks down and how that affects the risk profile overall?
Yeah, so I mean, Dario Montagnesi, who's the founder of Ariete Capital and my partner in the business, and I were absolute veterans in this space. We've taken a lot of lessons learned from the past and realized that diversification and capital preservation and not doing anything that could possibly put the visa at risk tends to be what investors are looking for. Okay, generally investors that are looking at this sort of thing are coming from a country of risk or have enough risk in their portfolios already. They don't need more now. So because we've managed to launch Ariete Tech with pre-approved and registered IP, it means of the capital we bring in, we only have to put about 20% to innovation. The rest we're putting into regulated financial products of the highest quality. Well, so imagine you put 250,000 euros to qualify for your investor visa, of which 50,000 would go to innovation, which potentially could become the most valuable part of the business. Okay, we obviously believe in what we're doing and feel we'll develop some AI tools of real value. But at the same time, no guarantees. So we wanted the rest of the portfolio to balance that risk so that even in the worst case scenario, where the money you allocate to innovation is lost, what remains in place, the 80%, fills that hole up. And from year five, when the company is legally allowed to pay out profits, that amount's been recovered, and then investors can start getting profits out. And to achieve that, on the 80%, we're putting 20% into a top-rated corporate bond portfolio, 20% into asset-backed real estate investment trusts, which are typically looking at, say, a 6 to 7% rate a year, 20% into regulated mining and minerals funds. They're often a good hedge at times of volatility when people move towards commodities, and 20% into international tech funds of the highest quality. So it's a pretty nice, diverse portfolio that when you take a step back and you look at it, there's a lot of diversification, and it's a nice investment in its own right, even if you don't consider all the perks of the visa.
Yeah, that is very reassuring to hear the breakdown of those different areas. In terms of realistic downside scenarios, what might those look like in relation to the AI product primarily?
Yeah, so our primary product at the moment that we're designing is an AI tool for tangible collectible assets, things like watches, classic cars, art, wine, whiskey, baseball cards, you name it. Because when you put that whole industry together, you're looking at something substantial, but still with very opaque and old fashioned pricing methods. Okay, so an AI tool cuts out all the noise, scrapes all the latest data, can get you a very accurate evaluation and projection. And then on the back end, it will turn into a marketplace matching buyers and sellers and putting together fractional tokenized ownership of these assets. So democratizing Ferrari Dino, for example. Okay. In that, the second part of that industry that's quite inefficient are your middlemen brokers who take substantial commissions as well. So there's a lot of room for improvement there. We feel we're designing something of value that people will find use of, that potentially we could sell on to a financial institution in the future. But once again, of course, there are no guarantees. The space is moving very quickly, but we are looking at putting the right pieces in place. We've got some really strong engineers on board. We're looking at bringing in a non-exec with professional experience in AI and connecting family office money to AI investments and things like that. So we're going to give it absolutely our best shot. Dario and I both have good track record in making things work.
Yeah.
If we do pull off something incredible there, the return profile of the actual structure is really enhanced and looks very healthy. But in that worst case scenario, it's still looking at an average IRR of say 4 or 5% a year over a 10-year investment cycle, which is solid in its own right.
It's actually fascinating for me to hear how the AI product is going to work, because the other thing I do is AI transformation for businesses, and I did a PhD in that area as well. So when you say scraping price data and pulling it together like this, I know that works. I've done it, things like that before for clients. I have a lot of confidence in this just from hearing that. So in terms of who manages the underlying financial asset portfolio, that's the 80%, right? Who is that, and what oversight and reporting can investors expect to get?
Okay, so Dario and I experienced in our own right. However, we are aware that it's always good to seek help and seek support to make something more robust. So we've engaged with a leading Swiss bank, which gives us some good portfolio oversight as well as access to a lot of the funds we'll be targeting. We're well aware of the sort of industry average for those investment lines, the bonds, the REITs, etc. But through this particular bank, we're able to access those funds that do better than the industry. Okay, so there's another feature there linked to private banking that could add value to investors as well. In that that relationship we're able to extend to investors coming in, which is quite handy and quite interesting for a lot of people. So we manage it. It's got a full board of directors with portfolio oversight from a leading financial institution. And then the reporting investors can expect would be a quarterly newsletter from us, 2 webinars a year, one at April looking at the results of the previous year, one at around October, looking at the half year results. And then, of course, we're available for a Zoom call at any time.
Perfect. Yeah, very reassuring and good to have that regular communication available so they don't feel left in the dark. Okay, let's look at more about Italy itself and the retiree lifestyle case, because I think retirees are going to be making up a lot of the audience for this, and also digital emigres audience. One of the things that makes this route so appealing for retirees is that it doesn't have a full-time residency requirement, right? So what does that mean in practice? How much time does someone actually need to plan for to spend in Italy if they go down this route?
Well, yeah, the amount of time they spend in Italy is entirely up to them. There
A
are no
minimum?
state
Is there any
requirements.
minimum at all? Or
There's no minimum. You need to be there for your renewals and every 3 years, and beyond that, it's up to individuals. Usually, what determines that time is how much time they're willing to spend away from family and grandchildren, or
Mhm.
possibly not spending too much time in Italy in fear of becoming tax resident there. Okay, but that's not such a bad thing. Italy's putting in place good tax regimes to make it more and more attractive. But of course, it's not for everyone. But from our experience, clients are looking at doing, say, 3 to 5.5 months a year, but it gives them the flexibility of quickly shooting home for milestone birthdays and graduations and things like that.
So important, the flexibility, and it sounds like this is the maximum level available in programs like this.
And it adds another whole layer and dimension to the family they've left. Imagine Canadians, parents, grandparents have undertaken an Italian golden visa. It opens up a whole world of enjoyment to grandkids coming through and spending summers in Italy as well. So it adds a whole layer to the family dimension, which is such a privilege if you're able to access that.
Yeah, like having a second home somewhere a bit warmer than Canada.
Exactly.
So let's talk healthcare now, which you mentioned briefly at the beginning, but that's obviously a big concern for US citizens, and particularly in the more senior years. In terms of the Italian Golden Visa, what can a Golden Visa holder realistically access in terms of Italian public healthcare?
Yeah, you'd have full access without limitations. So that could be your family doctor, annual checkups, going through the process to get to specialists and more detailed exams, as you would in the imagine Canadian healthcare system. A lot of people do always keep their home healthcare arrangements in place, or like I've seen in Portugal, they'll be on a dual system. They'll have access to public, but then your private healthcare costs in Europe, especially continental Europe, are significantly less than you'd imagine. It's still really good value. So you'll often find people actually on a dual system of a bit of private, and then when they need it and they need something quick, but generally using public healthcare for other things.
Yeah, that's going to be a game changer for people from the US because it doesn't seem very easy over there. So a huge benefit. Okay, in terms of freedom of movement, Italy is already a member of the Schengen zone. What does that mean for somebody in practical terms who's mainly based in the US still, but wants to spend extended periods in Europe using this program?
So Americans are fortunate in that they have permanent Schengen access with their passport, so they can do 90 days in every half-year period in the Schengen zone. But now the key difference is, instead of having to return to the US or exit the Schengen zone, they can return to Italy for 90 days, reset the clock, and then go to Spain or France or wherever they may wish. So it gives them a lot more ease of travel and flexibility as well.
Okay, so it's like bolting on this extra 90 days that they can use Italy as their reset country instead of leaving Schengen completely, right?
Correct. And obviously in Italy, they can spend as much time as they want. It doesn't count as time in the Schengen space. But then do 3 months in Spain, come back to Italy for 3 months, go to France for 3 months, and then maybe pop back home for Thanksgiving and Christmas at the end of the year.
Perfect. Okay, so we've talked about all the nice stuff and the appealing stuff, but again, there has to be an application process, right? And there's documentation involved, and that's kind of be the tedious part. So could you walk us through that, what that looks like end to end for could be a US citizen, but I suppose UK and Canadian would be the same. What are the steps? What documents do they need? And what friction points have you seen in your experience so far?
So we work closely with a number of immigration lawyers who handle that. And it's important that they're arm's length of ourselves in that they will review us on behalf of their client to make sure that we are indeed who we say we are and we are indeed eligible. That said, typically in Italy, you work towards getting your nulla osta visa, which is your nulla osta letter, more like, which is a pre approval letter. At that stage, you know it's a done deal and you can invest. To get that, you need to show that you're an individual of good standing. So the things you'd expect, source of funds, source of wealth, criminal records, will checks will occur. And then you'd also, part of the application, submit who you'll be investing with. So bylaws of the company you're investing with, any qualifying requirements that they have. The authorities review that, come back with an ala osta saying, great, you're happy to proceed with an ala osta. You get a 2-year investor visa or visa to make the actual investment. Once you've got that, as soon as you enter Italy, you've got to make the investment in a short amount of time. We're working with people that obviously as an innovative startup, you'll do rounds of capital raising. So we can't wait for a year and a half for someone to then allocate. So people generally are investing within 3 months of approval in our case. Then once you don't have to come to Italy to make the physical investment. That can be done remotely abroad. And then you'd come through to Italy for registrations and biometrics. And then usually within a month or two of that happening, the physical golden visa is available.
Okay, so what is it, a couple of months from making the commitment to having a residency card actually in hand?
The record we've had is 30 days for the nulla osta. I'd say the average is, say, 65 to 75 days. Thereafter, within 3 months, assuming the client is motivated and getting things done, they can be in a position to have everything as they wish. One of the bottlenecks is a very specific AML, anti-money laundering bank reference letter that the authorities want from the bank where the capital's coming from. Okay, some banks are able to issue it exactly as the Italian authorities want to see it. Other banks aren't. We do have some backup plans in place, including with the Swiss bank I touched on earlier, who are happy to initiate a simplified banking relationship with investors of ours, as well as issue the letter the way the authorities want to see it. So we've got a backup plan in place. For example, with American banks, probably 1 in every 3 banks are able to issue it, but then a couple of others aren't. Italy, like Portugal, Spain, Greece, being Southern Europe, bureaucracy and getting things right is quite important. So if the letter isn't as the Italian authorities want to see, it can cause a blockage in the actual process.
I've noticed in the past that that the bank part can be a real sticking point and a delay in the Portugal context as well. So it's good that you've got a backup plan for that. I think that's going to keep things
Yeah.
moving nicely.
And it's a backup plan that people really appreciate, because to be able to offer an offshore, say, golden visa investor solution with hand in hand with the offshore banking arrangement and all the value that a Swiss bank can bring to a client, especially an international client looking at diversification, currency hedges, etc. The two things actually go really well together. So it's getting packaged increasingly as a win-win.
For sure. So your Ariete Tech offering, am I right that you have 40 investor slots left and it closed in December 2027? Is that
You're
accurate?
right about the 2027.
Yeah.
We launched with 40 available slots, okay, of which 32, 33 are taken already. So from October until now, but we've just opened up 10 extra slots. So they're going to be 50 investors in Ariete Tech. Not to worry, we already have 2 alternatives lined up, which will be asset backed with a bit of real estate coming through that will be available for launch as soon as this closes. So those are quite imminent.
Okay. If somebody is interested in this, we can put a link in the description so they can book a call to have a chat with you.
I think absolutely. If they're interested in what we're doing, but generally interested in Italy, we're always happy to share our contact, share our experience, share our knowledge to make sure people are getting that sort of welcome and efficient step into Italy that they're looking for. It is a daunting process whenever you move country or go through this sort of thing. So we'd like to help and facilitate that and make it as positive as possible. So happy to have a call with people with no commitments, really just to see how we can help. And if we can work together, great. If not, happy to introduce you to the right immigration lawyers and
Yeah.
people that you'll need.
Sounds good. So, as we're being, transparent with this, who is this program genuinely not the right fit for? I mean, are there any honest reasons that you would tell someone to look elsewhere?
I think if people are looking at this with young dependents and it's really about a plan B that will lead to a passport, then Italy's not the ideal fit. Okay, in that to get the passport, it does take 10 years and you need to commit the time
And learn Italian,
and learn Italian. But I
B1.
mean, yeah, B1, which is absolutely doable in a 10-year time frame.
But it's a lot easier than Greek.
Exactly. So in that case, I think there are alternatives to look at. Actually, not that many in Europe. It's limited on what you could look at. And then in terms of Ariete Tech, as I mentioned earlier, an innovative startup cannot pay out profits for the first 5 years. Everything legally has to be reinvested. So if people would need access to that money potentially in the short term, they need to look at an alternative investment in Italy, which would usually cost a bit more, but at least then there's liquidity and dividends from the first year. And then those that are maybe not comfortable with the concept, it's interesting. Even though we've done so much to mitigate that startup risk, a lot of people are still perhaps not comfortable with the 20% allocation to R&D. I mean, we've got a structure in place that sort of protects against any losses there, but there's horses for courses in all situations.
Yeah.
Luckily, we've got alternatives for those people as well.
That's good. Yeah. I mean, especially it being an AI product. I mean, I'm thoroughly confident about AI myself, but I realize a lot of people are not there yet. And,
Mm,
if they're not comfortable, then yeah, perhaps this is not the right vehicle for them. But it sounds like it will be for many others. So no issues there. I think
yeah.
in closing, unless there's anything else particular that you want to add at this stage.
No, for us, as I said, from our experience, you're really looking on average people, say 56, 57 up, semi-retired, retired position, where 250,000 euros is absolutely doable and good value for them. And from the profile of investors in terms of nationality, it's generally Americans, Canadians, Brits, and Turks would comfortably be our top four.
Okay. And is the US the top one in that, or who's the biggest
It
group?
is the top one. Yeah, it is the top one.
Do you think there's any specific reason for that? Is it like Italy is quite appealing to Americans, or something else driving that?
Yeah, I think Italy tends to be at the center of most Americans' European dream, more so than other countries. It's one that most have visited and have happy memories and experiences in. Um, so they're very comfortable with it as a jurisdiction. They're familiar with it. But also, I think it's a general trend in the industry post-COVID, where before then, Americans weren't really on the map. But, things have happened since then that have made them think,
No.
home's a lovely place, but possibly not all it's made out to be in certain ways. Let's have some alternatives. At the end of the day, there's no downside to this. It is an investment. It's not a donation. So it should be something that returns value to you, but then gives you all of the other things and perks that come with it. So there's no real downside to this. And it just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Well, thanks for walking us through that. It certainly sounds like some huge benefits there, and a great vehicle for the right person. If anyone's interested in having a chat with Michael and his team, we've got a booking link in the description where you can get on his calendar and have a no obligation chat about whether this is the right fit for you.
So I've really enjoyed this. Appreciate it, Samantha. And wishing you all the best for the year ahead. Thanks so much.
So there you have it. The Italian Golden Visa has just been sitting quietly in the background while everyone else has been chasing Portugal and Greece. But as Michael has just explained, the structure that Arietta Capital has built around the innovative startup route fundamentally changes the conversation. The entry point is €250,000, which is one of the lowest thresholds for European residency anywhere on the market today. Your capital goes into a diversified portfolio that's designed to hold its value regardless of how the tech side performs. In return, you get permanent residency, Schengen freedom of movement, access to public healthcare, and, depending on your situation, some seriously attractive tax treatment. And none of this requires you to relocate to Italy permanently or wait a decade to get a passport. This is residency as optionality, a plan B that gives you the right to be in Europe whenever you want to be or need to be. If that sounds worth exploring, Michael's offering that free introductory call to anyone watching this video. No obligation, just an honest conversation about whether this route might make sense for you. The link is in the description below. And if you found this video useful, feel free to like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks so much for watching.